Over the years, much has been published in print and on film about America's first black airmen who received their pilot training in 1942 in Alabama. Little, however, has been publicly known about America's first black Marines, a group that received its training around the same time at a camp right here in North Carolina. That is, until recently. In November of 2006, an hour-long documentary called The Marines of Montford Point Fighting for Freedom premiered before an audience of those first black Marines who are also World War II veterans. Producer Deborah Holt brings us their story.
They've come to watch the unfolding of their story as they remember it, in the same spirit that led them to enlist in a war to liberate others while struggling to attain full liberties in their own country. Their hearts are full of hope that the right thing will take place and a little-known truth finally told.
That we were there, they didn't want us, but we were determined to show them that we could do the job, and we wanted our generation to have something to be proud of.
They trained on these grounds and in these buildings here at Montford Point, a segregated training base constructed at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. I'm a history buff looking for stories about us that have not been told or properly told in the industry that I live in. I work and live in movies. There's so many stories that have not been told and been told wrong, and I live in the truth, and this is the truth that's not on our screen, so it's actually for us to do.
Until recently, the only reminders of Montford Point were a state historic marker and a museum where the camp once stood. Now, the story about Montford Point is also marked by an hour-long documentary, thanks to the initiative of a public school superintendent who completed a career of service as a U.S. Marine Corps officer.
This preview of the documentary that you're about to experience represents a significant event in military history.
Like many, Dr. Willie at one time had no knowledge about those who paved the way for him to serve.
While I was at Camp Lejeune, I would frequent the base cleaners. And when I would go in there, I would frequently run into an older gentleman, stately gentleman, who would come up to me for no reason, and he saw my little gold bars on my collar there. I was a second lieutenant. And he would come out and he would talk to me. And he would tell me about how good it was to see, an African American wearing the gold bars of a second lieutenant. And I'm standing there. I didn't know where he was coming from or who he was. And then I found out that his name was Gilbert Johnson, a retired sergeant major.
This sergeant major was the notable Marine drill instructor Gilbert Hashmark Johnson, in whose honor Camp Johnson is named.
And I said, my goodness gracious, this is a little known, African American history fact. And I determined that it was something that needed to be brought to light.
Dr. Willie recalls an early encounter with history professor Dr. Melton McLaurin.
Let me ask you a question. I said, have you ever heard of the Montford Point Marines? He said, no. I said, you never have? And he then explained to me that he was had written several books, authored several books about military history and just history in general. And I said, well, let me tell you something.
Together with Dr. McLaurin and support from the University of North Carolina, Wilmington, as well as South Carolina State University, a historical documentary about the Montford Point Marines became a reality.
The long, bloody struggle against Japan in the South Pacific Island campaigns of the Second World War saw the first African-American Marines in the service of their country since the American Revolution.
These men have been on the sidelines for 60 years. They've heard and seen the stories of the Tuskegee Airmen, the Buffalo Soldiers. The USS Mason has a movie that came out last year, and they kept asking, when is it my turn? When are they going to find out what I did? So it's huge.
Well, it's called Fighting for Freedom because they were fighting for freedom on so many levels, not just in the Second World War or in Korea, and some of them fought in Vietnam, but particularly for the World War II vets. They were fighting, and the Korean War vets, they were fighting for the freedom to be accepted as Marines and as first-class American citizens.
The first thing that happened to me, the natives walked up to me and said, "Let me see your tail." The white Marines had told me that all black people had tails.
There were 3 actual combat units, only 2 that were deployed overseas, the 51st and 52nd Defense Battalions. They never saw combat. They were the ones who really were trained for combat. They never saw combat. The people who saw combat were the members of ammunition companies and depot companies, and they were involved in some of the bloodiest battles in the Pacific.
I also learned, too, that we had several African American Marines who served on Iwo Jima, who were there when the flag was raised. It's not documented, but they were there.
We just wanted to leave it up to them and to have them tell us their story in their own words, because that's the most important way to have it told. We wanted to also hear about what the experience was like at the camp itself. Everything from the mosquitoes to the stapled huts, everything that they had to say.
If it was the approval of the Montford Pointers themselves that the filmmakers were seeking, it seems Fighting for Freedom has brought them that victory.
It raised an Academy Award. It's outstanding.
For more information about the documentary or the book, contact the University of North Carolina at Wilmington at 910-962-3271, or you can go online to library.uncw.edu/web/Montford. You'll also find a link on the web link section at our website, and that address is unctv.org/ncnow. That's our show for tonight. Thanks.